A perfect complaint supported by airtight legal theory does not guarantee a trial. If the court fails to validly acquire jurisdiction over the person of the defendant, the case cannot proceed, rendering the complaint a legal nullity. That jurisdictional gap is bridged by the summons. It is a coercive mandate requiring the defendant to appear and answer. It serves as the physical delivery of the state's power and the concrete application of procedural due process. The 2020 amendments to the Rules of Civil Procedure reconfigured the burden of service. The responsibility for delivering the summons, once a primary duty of the court, now falls directly on the plaintiff. Under this framework, a single procedural error or a failure to document service with precision results in immediate dismissal. If the rules are not followed exactly, any subsequent judgment becomes void. Under Section 1, the clerk must issue summons within 5 calendar days of receiving the pleading, triggered only upon full payment of fees. Section 2 requires the NATN elements: names of parties, authorization to serve, time to answer, and notice of default. There is a key exception in Section 1. The clerk will not issue a summons if the complaint is dismissible on its face under Rule 9, specifically in cases of obvious prescription or a lack of jurisdiction over the subject matter. The notice of default must be precise. The amended rules require an explicit warning that if the defendant fails to answer, the plaintiff will take judgment by default and may be granted the relief applied for without the defendant's participation. Sections 1 and 2 represent the ministerial activation of the court's power. Once the summons is signed and sealed, the plaintiff is responsible for the movement of the case. Section 3 identifies the authorized servers. While the sheriff or a court officer is the primary server, the plaintiff is authorized to serve the summons if the officer fails to complete service. The plaintiff is also authorized to cause service if the defendant is located outside the judicial region. Corporate plaintiffs must formally name an authorized representative via a board resolution or secretary certificate to carry out this duty. Under Section 3, there is a strict penalty for dishonesty. If a plaintiff misrepresents that the defendant was served, the case is dismissed with prejudice. All prior proceedings are nullified, and the court imposes appropriate sanctions. These provisions require the plaintiff to act as an active executor of the court's process, carrying the full legal risk of any service failure. Section 4 defines the duration of the summons. It remains valid until it is duly served or explicitly recalled by the court. Personal service, defined in Section 5, is the standard for due process. It requires handing a copy of the summons to the defendant in person and informing them they are being served. If the defendant refuses to receive and sign for it, the server utilizes a method called tendering. The service is completed by leaving the summons within the view and in the physical presence of the defendant. In practice, leaving the document at a doorstep and departing is insufficient. A valid tender requires proof that the defendant was physically present, aware of the server's purpose, and actively refused the document. Personal service ensures absolute certainty of notice. It remains the preferred method, establishing an undeniable physical link between the defendant and the court's mandate. If personal service is impossible, Section 6 allows for substituted service. Because this method deviates from the standard requirement of personal notice, the court acquires no jurisdiction unless the server complies exactly with the statutory requirements. The server must attempt personal service 3 times on 2 separate dates. If unsuccessful, copies may be left at the defendant's residence, with a resident at least 18 years old of sufficient discretion, or at their regular business with a competent manager in charge. In UCPB v. Ongpen, the Supreme Court clarified that a corporation where a defendant merely serves as chairman does not qualify as their regular place of business if they do not hold office there on a daily basis. The rules for substituted service are rigid. Leaving the summons with a minor or a low-level clerk who lacks discretion results in a fatal defect in service, preventing the court from acquiring jurisdiction. Section 13 addresses evasive defendants through their own lawyers. If a lawyer makes a special appearance to question the summons, the court directly deputizes that counsel to serve summons on their own client. This provision prevents the strategy of quashing service to delay a trial. The moment a lawyer appears to challenge, the law transforms them into the instrument of the state's mandate. For defendants whose identity or whereabouts are unknown, Section 16 provides for service by publication in a newspaper of general circulation. This requires a written motion and an affidavit proving diligent inquiry. That diligent inquiry must occur within 90 calendar days from the commencement of the action. These sections restrict the use of traditional delay maneuvers, ensuring that the jurisdictional process moves toward a resolution on the merits. All efforts to serve the summons are documented in the server's return. Under Sections 20 and 21, this document serves as the sole evidentiary basis for a judge to assume jurisdiction over the person of the defendant. The timing is strict. The server must complete service within 30 calendar days of issuance. Within 5 days of that service, they must file the return with the court and provide a copy to the plaintiff's counsel. For substituted service, the return must be a detailed narrative. It must state the impossibility of prompt personal service, the exact dates and times of the 3 attempts, and the specific qualifications of the person who received the copies. A return that merely states the summons was served to the defendant's wife is fatally defective. Because it fails to document the 3 specific procedural requirements, the service is invalid and the court cannot proceed. Rule 14 requires forensic precision. A missing detail in the return can nullify a multi-million peso judgment, demonstrating that in civil procedure, due process is established only through meticulous documentation.